Welcome back. Let's now have our conversation about the readiness of places of worship ahead of the phased reopening beginning Tuesday next week, if what the chairperson for the Interfaith Council, Bishop Anthony Muheria, said or announced on Tuesday is anything to go by. And he is here in the house. Bishop Anthony, thank you so much for making time for us. Karibu sana to the show. And it's a very important conversation because you announced on Tuesday that places of worship will begin reopening on Tuesday. Maybe you can tell us what you meant by that. Does it mean that now, from where you sit, all places of worship are ready, or they have approved to be ready to adhere to these guidelines provided by the Ministry of Health and also the ones that were announced by the head of state on Monday?
Yes. As you recall, the head of state, President Uhuru Kenyatta, appointed the Interfaith Council, which was meant to study and in studying propose a way of safe reopening of our churches, of our places of worship, mosques, temples, and all places where we unite to pray. And that team has been working for a long time. It has studied very many suggestions of over 800 religious leaders of this country, plus other suggestions and submissions. And after all that study, it was obvious that on one hand, there was a great desire for people to go back to their places of public worship. But on the other hand, the danger of the rising cases and still the spread of the virus is still looming and is real. So there was a balance. And that's when the president lifted those restrictions and also gave the Interfaith Council the mandate to determine when and how this phase reopening will be done. Prior to the announcement, we already had submitted to His Excellency the President our suggestions of the phased reopening.
Yes.
The first phase, of course, we thought was due at this time. We felt it could be something more contained. And that's why we said within 7 days, the churches could start, once they have looked into the compliance of the minimum that we have asked of those churches, they can start thinking about reopening. So I think it is one wish and an incentive for every single place of worship, church, mosque, temple, to be prepared within this at least 7 days. And I think many have started
and you'll be telling us what this preparation is all about. But before the head of state announced the extension of these restrictions, that was on 6th of June, he mandated the council, especially to come up with protocols on how you think you can reopen. So on the 6th, that was on Monday, he said that he's announcing just a few of them. And we heard him talk about just 100 members, services not going for more than 1 hour. Maybe you can tell us details of what these protocols, because he said this is just a few, is what the head of state said and what, of course, people are complaining about all there is in your recommendations, or do we have much more?
Yes, indeed, the recommendations are very expansive.
Yes.
And in fact, the president said but a few, just to mention some of those things. The guidelines, which we are calling those protocols and guidelines, we prefer to call them guidelines, that we have proposed, are not complicated. They consist of 5 phases. They're what we call the pre-opening phase, the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then the final phase 4, which goes back to normality. So, and the idea is we are going to speak about this. We are going out to the counties to try and explain first to the religious leaders, and that's the work that we have coming week. So we're going to go and try to publicize and to make the people familiar with what are the contents of the whole cycle.
We are going to start with phase 1?
Right now we have given in the statement we made on Tuesday, the Interfaith Council, which I am chairing, and therefore it was the Interfaith Council which announced that the first phase, which will be the pre-opening phase, not phase 1, but the pre-opening phase, will start coming Tuesday. What really that means is that many churches or mosques will open soon after. You realize on Friday will be when the mosques ordinarily have their main prayers. On Saturday, the SDAs, and on Sundays, the Christian churches. But there are also the Hindus who also meet in other days. And the daily meeting for public worship will also be provided that those places of worship have been duly prepared. So it was, we needed a space so that people are ready to prepare. But even this phase, which we are calling the pre-opening phase, is quite restrictive, precisely in order that we can start getting accustomed to how we are going to open, and also in view of the situations that we find ourselves in. So as I said, these are for the places of public worship. There will be those pre-opening phase 1, phase 2, and the latitude with which those places or the public worship will take place will go expanding on each phase. And in all this, as you said, we can go to that later, there are the conditions, and they are basically following the proposals. We received very many expert advice. We listened and learned a lot from experts, from modeling, from Ministry of Health, from the support of Ministry of Interior, which made us aware of the real dangers. And also we weighed now, according to that advice, what would be prudent. Because on one hand, we would like the people, of course, to go back to places of worship, but we do not want in any way to endanger their lives or have this be the cause of maybe an upsurge of the infections.
All right. And as of Tuesday, we will be, of course, seeing some places of worship reopen. What are the conditions? What are you looking at? What are some of the advice that you've, the conditions you've laid bare that unless we've seen this in all places of worship, then if you are a pastor, your church cannot open, really? Well,
I would like to underline that, and that the President did. The most important point here is that responsibility. The responsibility is individual responsibility and community responsibility. We are urging self-regulation. We are not going to follow from close by saying, are you following directly? There will be teams, there will be interfaith committees at various levels that will oversee in order to advise and to make sure that the people at least feel the moral obligation to follow. But the conditions that we have placed, or better, the guidelines, the touch lines upon which the reopening of places of public worship are going to follow are various. In fact, the report we submitted is a 36-page report, so it's quite long. But basically, the first basic conditions and requirements are first and foremost that there must be places of sanitation, of hand washing or sanitizer, so that every single congregant who comes to that place of public worship is able to sanitize, wash their hands before and after the ceremony. The second is regarding the use of masks, that every single congregant who comes to the place of worship must have their masks and maintain that mask worn throughout the time of that public worship. And that mask worn covering the nose and covering the mouth as it should be properly. The third is that there must be social distance of 1.5 meters to avoid any cross-infection between one another. These are demands, these are the indications already received from Ministry of Health, which we are putting into effect. The fourth, in this first phase especially, we have asked that the elderly above 58 and those who are under 13 will, for this time, be encouraged to stay at home. And that will be working with a more healthy sector of our congregants, which will be then easier to contain even any infection. The adverse effects of the infection will most probably be easily containable than if we had elderly people, more elderly people in the congregants. And finally, a cap that no matter how big the church is, if the church may even have more space at the 1.5 meter spacing to accommodate more than 100, for this first pre-opening phase, we are requiring and asking that they should have only 100 people participating in that public worship.
All right. And before we get to the questions being raised and concerns from these guidelines, especially on the age factor, let's talk about the weather, because, places of worship, they have different modes of worship.
Yes.
Really. And we for some places they are singing, they are dancing, and you imagine someone putting on their masks. There is the issue of breathing, and also the order of service. Some places are used to taking more than an hour. And so do we have an ideal order of service, or it's as per every religious leader to see how they are going to reorganize their services?
The Interfaith Council, thanks be to God, is made up of people from all kinds, all the walks of faith traditions. And so we have actually debated and discussed so as to understand each one of those faith traditions, what are their main requirements and what normally happens within their place of public worship. And it is with this that we have come with a proposal that cuts across all faith traditions, where with these particular characteristics, we know we are safeguarding the health and obviously not endangering our congregants. However, we do not try to prescribe any faith tradition what they should do. It is not our role, and I think it would be presumptuous of us to say you can do this, you cannot do this. But we give general instructions and general guidelines, and those guidelines have been very well received by the umbrella bodies of those faith traditions, and they are actually implementing and putting it now in the accommodation of the way they celebrate or the way they pray or the way they worship God. And it is up to them to see how these general guidelines we've given can be accommodated within their way of worship. But we still require that those, much as we know it is a demand, a very stringent demand, that they accommodate even to the timings, they accommodate to the way of worship, so that they have in the back of their mind safety of the congregants.
All right. I'm sure you've received complaints such as the 58-year-olds being locked out of services, and some of them actually claiming to be the leaders in different places of worship, and also missing out on the spiritual nourishment. We're also talking about the young people, 13-year-olds and below, are not supposed to attend services. Again, questions on their morals. You know, this is where they get moral guidance from the church leaders. How are we addressing that? And the head of state was very categorical that this one should not, for now, attend services.
I think, again, what the president said very much goes together with the advice from the Interfaith Council, that for the time being, remember, we are in just the pre-opening stage. We want to start off with a group that we will be a bit secure and the risks will be lower. As we go ahead, of course, we will try to accommodate those older ones even within the worship as we go through the phases. So it is a question first that we want and wish that all the religious leaders take to heart, and all believers, wherever they are, to comply with the general requirements. And once we have this going well, once we have the habit of following those guidelines clearly, then those older ones joining will be in less danger. So I think it's first important to see that we are setting the stage. That's why you're calling it pre-opening. We are setting the stage. And we want to set the stage with the safest module that we can have. And that's why we're having that.
Right.
So they shouldn't be worried that they won't come. They very soon, God willing, we'll have them with us. But as well, the innovation of each congregation should find ways of reaching out to them and serving them and communicating and trying to uplift them in various means. The same happens with the younger ones who will not be able to be there. We must find new innovative ways for this phase as we are, so as to accommodate and reach out to them.
All right. We are short of time. We are winding up. But not before I ask you, some of these are saying they are, let's assume they are the leaders in their respective places of worship.
Yes.
Let's say a pastor is over 58 years old, and he is, you know, the one leading this particular church, and that applies to other places of worship. What happens?
I think we've left that to the superiors, the people who are the ones overseeing those particular pastors, to make the prudent decision. One, don't endanger the life of the pastor. If there is a possibility of having someone else take that role, very well, let him do so. But if not, and you see prudential, use all the prudence. And in this case, you will have that using all the needs that are there. But again, I want to just say, remember what we want to tell everyone: let's pray for the end of this pandemic. And let's be very, very responsible. It is now my responsibility to be my brothers and sisters' keeper, even in those places of worship.
All right, and Amos says we have to wind up. In 30 seconds, from where you sit, sir, are places of worship ready to reopen come Tuesday?
In 30 seconds, I think by and large, yes. By and large, they are going to pass the average pass, but we are going to improve day by day. Right. The challenge are the places where the resources are short. And so we are calling upon the county governments and the national government to assist those small mosques, churches, or places of worship which may need a boost for a tank, for water, and for some other minimal things that I think well-wishers, government and county governments can come in very handy. But I can say in a score of 1 to 10, I would say will be around 6 or 7.
6. All right. We'll be seeing, and of course, we'll see how that pans out come Tuesday. We'll be monitoring how prepared places of worship are. Bishop Anthony Muheria, thank you so much for your time, elaborating on especially how we should be reopening places of worship. We thank you for your time.
God bless you.
All right. And thank you so much for watching.